So today we're going to cover Chapter 1, Section 4C. Today we're going to learn how to solve quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. So you're going to need to memorize the quadratic formula for the test next week. Your last test of the quarter is a week from today. It's next Thursday, but we do have our last quiz tomorrow. So whenever you're using the quadratic formula, it's for quadratic equations, and your quadratic equation needs to be put in standard form first. If it's not in standard form, you're not going to get the right A value or B value or C value for the formula. So once you put it in standard form, then you're just going to pull out that A, B, and C and plug it right into the formula. Some of you probably learned this in Algebra 1, and there's all kinds of silly songs out there to help you remember it. So my first example is already in standard form. So I'm going to go ahead and pull out my A, B, and C values, and I'm going to plug it into the formula. Now I'm going to go ahead and write the formula up at the top of the page. Now, when I put it into this formula, I think of this first negative b as really saying the opposite of b, plus or minus b squared minus 4 times a times c. That's all under the square root symbol, and then it's divided by 2 times a. So let's go ahead and figure out what a, b, and c are for number 1. So my a value is the number in front of x squared, and it equals 1. Now my b value is going to be, and I'm going to pull that sign with it, so my b value is actually negative 4. And then my c value is the constant, and that's just going to be positive 2. Now that I have a, b, and c, now I can plug it into the formula that I wrote at the top of the page. So again, I think of this as the opposite of b, but if you want to put it in as negative, you can, or the negative b, then it's negative, and it's really just going to turn positive. And then plus or minus b squared, so negative 4 squared, minus 4 times my a value, which is 1, and my c value, which is 2. And then it's all divided by the 2 times a. And my a value is 1. So now my negative 4 turns positive. And then negative 4 squared is 16. And when I multiply these last three, the 4ac, I pull that as a negative 4. So I do negative 4 times 1 times 2, and I get negative 8. So then I'm going to put in here minus 8. Now, if you'd rather treat it as a positive 4 and leave the negative sign or the subtraction sign there, you can do that as well. Now I need to subtract what's underneath the square root symbol, and 16 minus 8 is 8. Now, everybody pay attention right now. Do not, and I repeat, try to simplify the 4 and the 2 before you break down the radical first. You must simplify the square root first, then simplify the fraction. So I'm going to break down the square root of 8. You're going to be leaving things in simplest radical form. So the square root of 8, I can factor this into 4 times 2. If you recognize 4 is a perfect square, you don't need to go all the way to prime. And this just becomes a 2, and then the square root of 2 stays behind. So now, and I'll come down here where it's nice and plain. 4 plus or minus the square root of 8 now becomes 2 square root 2. Now I can simplify the fraction. So this 2 that's in the denominator needs to be able to divide into both of the terms in the numerator. And I can divide them both by 2. The 4 becomes a 2, the 2 becomes a 1, and this 2 also becomes a 1. So my final answer here is going to be 2 plus or minus the square root of 2. For web assign, it's going to make you pull it apart. You're going to do 2 minus the square root of 2, and then 2 plus the square root of 2. And this is what x equals. Okay, so for number 2, this one is also already in standard form. So I'm going to go ahead and pull out my a, b, and c value. My a is 1, my b is negative 3, and my c is negative 2. And now I can put it right into the formula. So again, for that negative b, I think of it as the opposite of b. So this will become a positive 3 plus or minus b squared minus 4 times a times c. That's all under the square root symbol, and then 2 times a. What's under the square root symbol? It's a vocabulary term called the discriminant, and that value of the discriminant can tell you how many solutions your quadratic will have. And you probably covered that in your Algebra 1 class, but we're not worried about that right now. We're just worried about finding our values of x. So 3 plus or minus negative 3 squared is 9. And again, I'm going to multiply this as negative 4 times positive 1 times negative 2, and I get positive 8. And then over the 2 times 1, I'm going to add what's under my square root symbol, and I get 17. 17 is prime. I can't break it down, so I'm finished. Again, remember, for WebAssign, you're going to pull it apart. And this is what x equals. Now, for the next one, you have fractions in this thing. If you try to put fractions into your quadratic formula, you're going to have a nightmare. So we're going to clear the fraction so we don't have to deal with any fractions. And trust me, in years prior to this, when I give a question like this on the test, I still have students who do not listen and they put it in as fractions and they do get the question wrong because it's impossible to deal with. Okay, so we do have to put it in standard form first. Jeremy is correct. We need to set it equal to 0 and then we're going to clear the fraction. So I can go ahead and subtract the 3. And now I have it in the standard form. And if you remember from Algebra 1, standard form also said that you couldn't have fractions. So I'm going to clear my fraction. I'm going to multiply all 3 terms here by 12, my common denominator. So I'm just going to go ahead and put a 12 here, a 12 here, and then a 12 next to the negative 3. So once I multiply, this is going to simplify, and I'm going to change this to a 4. So then this becomes 8x. Then I'll do the same thing for the blue. I can simplify it, and then the 12 becomes a 3. And then I get negative 3x, and then nothing to cancel on the purple, so it just becomes a negative 36. Now I have integers that I can plug into my quadratic formula. So I did leave off the square, and that needs to go there and here. Perfect, thank you. All right, so now my A term is 8, my B term is negative 3, and my C term is negative 36. Now I can plug it into the formula. So again, I'm going to put it in as the opposite of B, so that's positive 3 plus or minus negative 3 squared minus 4 times A times C. That's all under the square root symbol, 2 times A. I need to simplify what's underneath that square root. So I'm going to go ahead and square the negative 3, multiply negative 4 times 8 times negative 36, and I get positive 1,152. And then 2 times 8 is 16. Now I need to add what's under the square root. So that gives me 9 plus 1,152 gives me 1,161. And now I got to break that down. Now I'm going to go back to my divisibility rules that probably were taught in 4th grade, where you can see what numbers will divide into that. I use the rule for 9 a lot when I'm factoring. And the divisibility for rule for 9 is you take the digits of the number. So the 1161, I add 1 plus 1 plus 6 plus 1. If 9, so this all adds up to 9. If 9 divides into that sum, then I know 9 is a factor of that number. And 9's a perfect square. So I'm going to go ahead and do a factor tree for 1161. And it's 9 times 129. 129, I can use those same divisibility rules from 4th grade. I can add 1 plus 2 plus 9, and that gives me 12. I know that 3 goes into 12, so 3 is a factor. 3 is not a perfect square, but at least I could break it down. But once I did that, and if I did the 9, this would become 3 and 3. Now I'm at prime numbers. So now I just look for my pairs. So I got a pair of 3s, so this 3 comes out. These guys don't have pairs, so multiply them back. So now I have 3 plus or minus 3 square root 129 over 16. I cannot simplify the 3's and the 16, so I'm finished. So the next one, always remember, put it in standard form first. It's equal to 0, but I need to switch these two. I'm not changing any signs, I'm just rewriting the order. So x squared plus 8x plus 10, and it's set equal to 0. Now I can get the correct A, B, and C values. So my A is 1, my B is 8, my C is 10. I now can plug it into the quadratic formula. So negative B plus or minus B squared minus 4 times A times C, all under the square root, and then 2 times A. I need to simplify what's under the square root, and I get 64 minus 40. 64 minus 40 gives me 24. Negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 24. Again, do not try to simplify that negative 8 and the 2 yet. Break down the square root first. So the square root of 24, I can do a factor tree. It doesn't matter if you start with 2 times 12, 3 times 8, or 4 times 6. I'm going to do 4 and 6. Again, if you want to see it all the way to prime, you can do that. Go back now and look for your pairs. I got a pair of 2's. And we get 2 square root 6. So the square root of 24 is 2 square root 6. Now I can simplify my fraction. I can simplify the 8, the 2, and the 2. The 8 becomes a negative 4. The 2 becomes a 1. This 2 becomes a 1. So my final answer is going to be negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 6. And again, for WebAssign, you're going to plug it in as negative 4 minus the square root of 6 and negative 4 plus the square root of 6. Number 5. So I need to get this into standard form. So what I'm going to do is write x plus 6 twice and FOIL it. Now, if you know the pattern where you could memorize it and just turn it into the trinomial, you can. But again, I like to just remember it's a binomial squared, write it twice and FOIL it. So x squared plus 6x plus 6x plus 36 equals negative 2x. I need to combine my like terms. And then I need to set it equal to 0. So I need to add 2x to the other side. And I get x squared plus 14x plus 36 equals 0. Now that I have it in standard form, I can pull out my A, B, and C values. So my A is 1, my B is 14, and my C is 36. And now I can plug it into the formula. Negative 14 plus or minus 14 squared 4AC, all under the square root, 2 times A, so 2 times 1. And this is all x equals. So I'll go ahead and simplify what's under the square root. 14 times 14 is 196. And then 4 times 36, or negative 4, is 144. And then 2 times 1. I now need to subtract 196 and 144. And I get 52. And now, do not simplify the 14 and the 2 yet. We got to break down the 52 first. So the square root of 52, I can factor this into 4 times 13. And then 4 is a perfect square, so 2 square root 13. So now I have negative 14 plus or minus 2 square root 13 over 2. Now I can simplify the fraction. I can divide all of these by 2. So this becomes a -7, a 1, and a 1. So final answer is going to be x is equal to -7 plus or minus the square root of 13. And again, web assign wants you to pull it apart. So -7 minus the square root of 13 and -7 plus the square root of 13. And we're done with the quadratic formula notes.